This is also a time of change for my family.
The palace had survived storms before, but this time the whispers were moving too fast, cutting too deep, and reaching too close to the crown. Then King Charles did something no one inside Windsor expected. He did not answer with a speech. He did not hide behind silence. He signed one direct order, and in that single moment, every rumor around Meghan was forced into the open. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew every person in that room understood the weight of what was coming. The king had reached the point where silence no longer protected the monarchy. It only allowed the storm to grow louder. A formal palace directive, a written royal instruction used to set official household rules, had been prepared with cold precision. Its purpose was simple and devastating. Meghan's remaining informal access to royal household briefings, private family channels, and symbolic communications tied to Windsor would be removed at once. The closed morning meeting at Buckingham Palace changed everything. Buckingham Palace is the main working headquarters of the monarchy, the place where decisions become more than private feelings and turn into institutional action. Charles sat at the head of the table, placed the signed folder down, and let the silence do half the speaking before he delivered the words, "No aid forgot. This ends today." The king did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Everyone understood that the order was not a warning. It was final. Meghan received the news privately, and the impact landed harder than any public statement could have. She read the notice once, then again, as if the second reading might soften what the first had already confirmed. The Duchess was not shaken only because access had been removed. She was shaken because Charles had proven he was willing to cut through family history, public pressure, and old emotional ties to protect the crown from further damage. Harry stood close enough to see her expression change, and that made the moment worse. The prince wanted anger to be simple, but it was not simple anymore. He saw Meghan's face tighten. He saw the words settle. He saw that his father had not chosen a debate. He had chosen a boundary. Harry felt loyalty pulling him toward his wife, and shock pulling him back toward the family he could no longer fully reach. Charles had not acted blindly. The Royal Communications Office, the team responsible for managing official palace messages, had sent the final verification note before the king signed. That note confirmed that unofficial routes could still twist palace details, challenge family decisions, and turn private confusion into public fire. The monarch had waited for proof, and once proof arrived, hesitation disappeared. William and Catherine understood the danger immediately. The prince saw that his father had crossed a line no apology could erase. The princess knew that from this moment forward, every person connected to the crown would have to choose a side. And once that folder landed on the table, everyone connected to the crown had to decide whether they were standing with Charles or standing in the path of what came next. A royal decision can look cold from the outside, but inside palace walls, it lands on human faces first. Charles carried the burden of a father and a king. Meghan felt the sting of being publicly cornered without a public reply. Harry felt the floor shift beneath his marriage. William watched the monarchy tighten its spine. Catherine understood the silence before the storm. Charles did not stand in that moment as a distant monarch with no heart left to bruise. He stood as a father who had watched private family pain spill into public suspicion, again and again, until every whisper became another wound on the crown. The monarchy, the royal system built around the king, his family, and their public duty, could survive criticism, but it could not survive endless confusion. That was why his order mattered. It was not only about Meghan, it was about stopping the family from bleeding into the headlines every time silence was mistaken for weakness. Meghan's name had become powerful because it carried emotion far beyond one person. Every rumor connected to her moved through the royal family, the press, and the public imagination like a spark looking for dry ground. She knew this. Harry knew it too. That was what made the directive so sharp. A directive is an official written instruction, and this one did not shout, accuse, or plead. It simply removed access. That quiet precision made Meghan feel exposed, because there was no dramatic sentence to fight, only a locked door, where a channel once existed. Harry stood in the middle of it all, and that was the part that cut deepest. The prince was not only defending Meghan, he was also staring at the truth that his father had chosen command over conversation. Charles had not invited him into a family debate. The king had delivered a royal decision, and Harry felt the difference immediately. There was no soft landing for a son who wanted to be heard, and no easy comfort for a husband watching Meghan absorb the blow. William had already been briefed before the order was released, and his silence told the room everything. The prince did not need to speak loudly to show support. His calm face gave the move future weight, because everyone understood that the next reign would not undo what this reign had begun. Catherine's role was quieter, but just as important. The princess had warned through a private family account that the household could not keep absorbing emotional shocks without clear boundaries. Catherine knew that protecting peace sometimes meant accepting pain. Then the first true crack appeared. Harry asked for a private call with Charles, hoping that father and son could speak without the pressure of the palace around them. The answer came back cold and clear. The king would meet him only under palace protocol, meaning official rules would guide the meeting, not personal emotion. That refusal changed the mood from shock to something more dangerous, because the story was no longer about a rumor, it was about trust breaking in real time. Every royal crisis has a hidden beginning, a single moment people later point to and say, that was when everything changed. For Charles, the point of no return came during a private anniversary reception at Clarence House, when a quiet family conversation was repeated outside palace walls within hours. The king did not explode that night. He simply listened, remembered, and began preparing. Charles had seen tension building for months, but that night turned concern into certainty. Private words were no longer staying private. Family emotion was moving too quickly into public debate, and each new whisper made the crown look less in control. The directive from the previous section, an official written order used to set palace rules, did not come from sudden anger. It grew from a slow realization that silence had become dangerous. Senior aides had warned Charles before, but warnings are different when proof arrives. They told the king that informal channels were creating confusion, especially when family feelings were mixing with royal messaging. Royal messaging means the official way the palace explains decisions to the public, and once that becomes blurred, people stop knowing what is family pain and what is crown policy. Charles understood why that mattered. A monarchy can survive criticism, but it cannot survive everyone believing there are two versions of the truth. Then came the Clarence House anniversary reception. Clarence House is a royal residence often used for private family gatherings and official meetings, but that evening it carried a heavier meaning. Charles spoke quietly about protecting William and Catherine's future role, not as gossip, not as strategy for public use, but as a family concern shared in trust. By the next morning, the same theme had surfaced outside palace walls. The king heard it, and something inside him hardened. Charles felt betrayed, because the conversation had happened in a room with no cameras, no press, and no official record meant for public interpretation. The monarch had not given a statement. He had not approved a message. He had simply spoken as a father and as a king, trying to protect the future. Yet somehow, the heart of that private moment had escaped. That was the trigger. That was the moment Charles later marked as the point of no return, in a documented palace account prepared for senior household staff. After the reception, Charles asked for a full review of every informal communication path still connected to Harry and Meghan. Harry's name mattered, because the prince still carried emotional history inside the family, and Meghan's name mattered because every link to her side could become a public storm. The review revealed that several symbolic access points had never fully closed, leaving space for confusion, pressure, and competing narratives. When the final report reached Charles, he did not call Harry first. The king summoned William. That choice changed everything, because once William was brought into the room before Harry, the decision stopped being only a father's response and became a future king's inheritance. The confrontation happened behind closed doors, but the emotional force of it echoed through the palace. Harry entered expecting a father. Charles received him as king. No aides spoke. No one interrupted. Meghan's name sat between them like a match near dry wood. Then Harry asked whether the order was punishment, and Charles finally answered with the sentence that froze the room. Harry arrived tense, carrying more than anger into that meeting. The prince still had his coat buttoned, as if part of him had not decided whether to stay, argue, or walk away before the first word was finished. Charles watched his son carefully, but the king did not reach for comfort first. He kept the signed directive on the table between them, and that choice spoke before either man did. A directive is an official written instruction, and this one proved the decision had already moved beyond emotion. Harry wanted a father's explanation, but he was facing a monarch's boundary. The prince accused Charles of humiliating Meghan, his voice rising as he warned that the order would be seen as a public rejection of his wife. Meghan was not in the room, yet her absence made her feel even more present. Harry repeated that she would read the move as a final insult, and Charles let the words hang long enough for the pain behind them to show. Charles looked directly at him and answered, "This is not about punishment. This is about protection." The king did not say it loudly. He said it with the cold steadiness of a man who had already counted the cost. That sentence changed the air between them. Harry heard protection, but he felt rejection. Charles meant the crown, the family, the future, and the fragile line between private love and public duty. Then Charles revealed through a recorded palace conversation that the household had documented repeated confusion around private royal channels. Royal channels are the official and unofficial routes through which family messages, briefings, and decisions travel. The king explained that blurred lines had created too much room for pressure, denial, and competing stories. Harry listened, but the prince's face changed when he realized this was not a sudden choice. It had been prepared, checked, and supported before he ever stepped inside the room. Harry's deepest wound came when William's name entered the discussion. The prince understood at once that his brother had known earlier, and that knowledge cut almost as hard as the directive itself. Charles did not soften that truth. The king allowed Harry to see that the future monarch had already been brought into the decision, because this order was no longer only about one marriage or one rumor. It was about the next reign. Harry left without shaking Charles's hand. The prince carried Meghan's anger, his own heartbreak, and the shock of William's silence out with him. One aide later recorded in a private staff account that Charles remained seated after the door closed, saying nothing for several long moments. The king looked wounded, but his sorrow did not reverse the order. And that was when the machinery of the monarchy began moving, with a force Meghan had not expected. Royal power is rarely loud. It moves through folders, signatures, locked doors, and carefully chosen witnesses. Charles's order worked because it was not emotional theater. It was structured, verified, and supported by the future of the monarchy itself. Behind the calm language was a hard truth. The king had finally decided that family pain could no longer outrank royal survival. Charles understood why the directive carried such force. It did not arrive as a private complaint, a family note, or a tired father's emotional reaction. It came through the royal household structure, meaning the official system of staff, offices, and procedures that keeps the monarchy running. That mattered, because once the order entered that structure, it became bigger than one argument. It became a rule the palace had to follow. The king had turned personal pain into institutional control, and that made the decision almost impossible to undo. William's quiet support gave the order its second layer of power. The prince did not need to make a dramatic speech or demand action. His silence said enough. Everyone inside the household knew that if the future king accepted this boundary now, then Meghan could not simply wait for the next reign and expect the door to reopen. William's position made the order feel permanent. It was no longer only Charles protecting today's crown. It was the next monarch protecting tomorrow's. Camilla watched Charles review the final wording, and she saw the moment his hand paused over Meghan's name. The queen consort understood that the king was not untouched by what he was doing. He had argued with himself before signing. He had carried the weight of Harry's anger before Harry even spoke. Camilla knew Charles could look firm in public while suffering in private, and in that pause, she saw the father still trapped inside the sovereign. Catherine felt the cost in a different way. The princess knew that any move against Meghan would pull Harry further from the family, perhaps forever. She had seen how every boundary became another headline, and every headline became another wound. But Catherine also understood why the line had to be drawn. A family can forgive confusion. A monarchy cannot keep functioning when private material is treated like public ammunition. Then the strongest clause changed everything. The order stated that no private family material could be treated as royal communication unless it was authorized through official palace channels. Official channels are the approved routes used by the palace to confirm messages, decisions, and public positions. That clause shut down the gray area. It removed the space where emotion could pretend to be authority. Another clause went even further. It closed Meghan's remaining symbolic connection to palace briefings, meaning she could no longer be treated as part of internal royal response planning. Meghan had not only lost access, she had lost recognition inside the machine. And once the directive left Charles's desk, the first consequence arrived quickly. Her scheduled private response meeting was cancelled. That cancellation was the moment Meghan understood this was not a warning shot. It was the door closing. The fallout did not begin with shouting. It began with silence. Meghan sat with the notice in front of her. The room too bright, the words too clean, the meaning too sharp. The palace had not attacked her character. It had done something colder. It had removed her from the royal bloodstream. For the first time, she had to face a Windsor decision she could not reshape. Meghan's first direct consequence came faster than she expected. The private communication review she had been waiting for was cancelled before she could use it to challenge the palace position. A communication review means a planned discussion about how royal messages, responses, and private concerns are handled. For Meghan, that meeting mattered because it was supposed to give her a voice inside the process. Without it, the Duchess was not debating the decision anymore. She was standing outside it. Harry tried to force one more conversation, but the answer came back through formal channels. Formal channels are the official palace routes used when private emotion is no longer allowed to guide the response. That was the message, inside the message. Charles was no longer answering as a wounded father who might soften under pressure. The king was answering through the crown, and Harry understood the difference immediately. The prince felt blocked, not by one locked door, but by an entire system moving into place. Meghan felt humiliated, because the order gave her no dramatic opponent to confront. There was no angry sentence to challenge, no emotional insult to quote, no public attack to answer line by line. Instead, the palace gave her procedure. It gave her silence. It gave her a decision that refused to bend. Meghan had fought storms before, but this one was different because the storm had no face. It was calm, official, and final. Harry became frustrated and protective, telling Meghan that Charles had chosen the crown over his own son. The prince said it with anger, but beneath that anger was fear. He could feel how far the family had moved without him. Meghan stayed silent longer than expected. and that silence unsettled him. She was not only absorbing the insult, she was calculating what it meant for every future palace decision. Then the deeper truth became clear, through a documented household note prepared after the cancellation. The palace had anticipated an emotional counterattack and removed the stage before it could happen. Meghan's meeting had not simply disappeared. It had been taken away because the royal household expected her to use it as a pressure point. The Duchess understood then that her concern was no longer only public image. Her real concern was access. Future decisions could now happen without any channel reaching her side first. But while Meghan absorbed the loss, Catherine saw something larger forming. The princess requested a private conversation with William before the public statement was finalized. Catherine knew this was no longer only about one order, one cancelled meeting, or one wounded couple. It was about the future tone of the monarchy itself. And while Meghan faced the pain of being shut out, Catherine saw a crown finally choosing discipline over drama. The turning point did not happen in a grand room. It happened in a quiet, private sitting room, where William stood by the window, and Catherine sat with her hands folded, choosing every word carefully. No courtiers were present. No papers were being read aloud. It was only husband and wife, future king and future queen, facing the cost of supporting Charles's boldest family decision. William knew that backing Charles meant accepting a harsher future with Harry. The prince understood that once he stood behind the king's order, the old brotherly road would become even narrower. The monarchy could not keep operating through emotional uncertainty, because every unclear boundary gave the next rumor room to grow. The crown, the symbol of royal authority and duty, needed steadiness, and William knew steadiness sometimes demanded a painful choice. Catherine understood the human damage better than anyone. The princess had lived through years of pressure, comparison, silence, and public judgment connected to family fractures. She knew how one private wound could become a national debate before anyone had time to breathe. Catherine did not see the order as victory over Meghan. She saw it as a hard line drawn after too many moments where personal pain had threatened public duty. William admitted something he had kept buried. He still remembered Harry as his brother before the interviews, before the distance, before every conversation felt dangerous. The prince spoke of old trust, like something he could still see but no longer touch. Harry had once been the person beside him in the storm. Now the Duke stood on the other side of a decision that would shape the family for years. Catherine answered with quiet strength. She told William that love without boundaries had become impossible, and that protecting the children and the crown now required clarity. The princess did not say it cruelly. She said it with the calm sadness of someone who knew kindness could not survive if chaos was allowed to rule every room. William heard her, and the prince knew she was right. Catherine then encouraged him to support a public statement that was firm but not cruel. A public statement is the palace's official message to the people, and this one needed to explain control without sounding like revenge. The princess wanted Charles's order to stand, but she did not want Meghan turned into a target. William agreed because he understood the difference between strength and spite. That agreement changed everything. William aligned behind Charles, and Catherine gave that alignment moral balance. The future monarchy no longer looked hesitant. It looked calm, deliberate, and united behind a boundary that could not be softened by emotion. By the time the palace released its statement, the world was ready to explode with reaction. The palace doors had closed in private, but outside, the whole world was waiting to judge what Charles had done. By morning, the story had left the palace and taken over the country. Screens flashed with breaking banners. Commentators leaned forward. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, staring through the gates as if the building itself might speak. But one newspaper front page captured the national mood with brutal simplicity. Charles in profile, Meghan in shadow, and the headline, "The King Draws the Line." Charles had finally answered years of palace tension with one unmistakable act of authority. The king had not argued with every rumor. He had not chased every headline. He had done something stronger. He had changed the rules. The modern monarchy, the royal family's public system of duty, tradition, and national service, was now being tested in front of everyone. People were asking whether the crown could protect itself without looking cruel. Broadcasters framed the move as a defining moment. One senior presenter called it the most personal institutional decision of Charles's reign during a recorded morning broadcast, and that phrase kept returning across the day. Institutional means connected to the system, not just one person's feelings. And that was why the words mattered. Charles had made a family decision through royal power, and the public could feel both sides of it. Strength on one side, pain on the other. Supporters of Charles saw discipline. They said the king had finally shown leadership after years of emotional pressure. To them, Meghan's access freeze was not revenge, it was survival. They believed the palace had waited too long to close the spaces where private tension could become public fire. Charles, in their eyes, had chosen order over chaos, and that made him look stronger than he had looked in months. Meghan's defenders saw something very different. They saw rejection, isolation, and the cold machinery of royal power moving against one woman without giving her a voice in the room. Meghan's name was not shouted in the palace statement, but everyone understood the message. The Duchess had been pushed out of the invisible circle where responses were shaped, and that silence made her supporters even angrier. Outside Buckingham Palace, one small public moment captured the emotional split. A crowd gathered near the gates, and one woman held a handwritten sign that read, "Family should heal, not cut." Others stood nearby defending Charles, saying the king had no choice. Buckingham Palace is the monarchy's main working headquarters, so that gathering mattered because people were not only reacting to a family dispute, they were reacting at the symbolic front door of royal authority. The palace statement avoided Meghan's name directly, but every line pointed back to the exact access freeze Charles had signed. The message stayed calm, careful, and sharp. It spoke of clarity, official roots, and protecting the dignity of the crown. Yet once the public noise faded, the real verdict still belonged to the family members left standing inside the palace. And behind the gates, away from headlines and cameras, Charles had to sit with the human cost of finally doing what he believed the crown demanded. In the end, Charles did not silence the rumors by arguing with them. He silenced them by removing their oxygen. Meghan was left reeling because the move did not chase noise. It closed the channels that kept the noise alive. Harry was left wounded. William was left hardened. Catherine was left steady. And Charles was left alone with the cost of being king. Charles understood the final meaning of his order better than anyone. The king had chosen institutional control over emotional confusion, even when the people affected were tied to his own blood. Institutional control means the palace system, rules, and official channels take charge instead of private feelings. That mattered because the monarchy could no longer let family pain decide how royal messages moved. Charles had not only answered one crisis, he had changed the way future crises would be handled. The monarchy emerged looking colder, but stronger. Windsor could no longer be shaped by personal history alone, and that was the real shock. Windsor means the royal house and the family identity connected to the crown, not only one building or one name. Meghan's defeat was not public humiliation in the usual sense. It was something quieter and sharper. The Duchess had been excluded from the invisible rooms where royal meaning is formed, where silence becomes strategy, and where decisions become history. Harry carried the heartbreak of that exclusion. The prince saw the order as another sign that his old family and his new life could no longer meet without pain. Meghan had lost access, but Harry had lost something harder to name. He had lost the belief that one emotional appeal could still move Charles as a father before the king answered as sovereign. That word, sovereign, simply means the ruling monarch with final royal authority. And on this day, Charles chose that role completely. Charles's real victory was not silencing Meghan directly. The king forced every future royal conversation back under official control. A documented palace account later made clear that the order was designed to stop private confusion from becoming public pressure again. Meghan could still speak outside the palace, but she could no longer reach into the palace machinery as before. That was the difference. The noise could continue, but the oxygen had been removed. William and Catherine's support confirmed the deeper change. The prince and princess had shown that the next reign would inherit the same boundary, making the order more than a temporary crisis response. William became harder because he accepted the cost. Catherine stayed steady because she understood why the line had to hold. Together, they gave Charles's decision a future. The emotional verdict is complete. This was the day Charles stopped reacting like a wounded father and acted like a sovereign, leaving Meghan shaken, Harry isolated, and the monarchy quieter, firmer, and changed forever. There is no unresolved ending here, only the sound of a palace door closing, and a crown that finally chose silence over chaos. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.